So thank you guys for being here. This is Powder Beauty. It is a Black-owned nail salon in the heart of Los Angeles, and we thought there was no better place to be talking about the beauty of Black women than in a Black-owned space, particularly in Los Angeles. And so we are very, very grateful to be here in a space that's beautiful and that to me looks a lot like Black excellence up and down the walls, and being able to have a beautiful space like this. So this is a space I think that's very femme, that a lot of us get to show up in, but womanhood looks different for everybody. And this is not a space that all women show up in, and so I do want to make sure that we honor that and hold that space. But I'm very grateful for you guys coming and hanging with us to have this conversation. And I think that there's some conversations that we haven't had as Black women as a group. Right? Like, what does cisgendered mean? What does it mean to be trans? Right? And there's some of this is conversations that we need to have like as a family, you need to have as sisters with each other. But we all have this similar experience as Black women of being resilient. And that's part of how we've gotten our power and our strength. That's revolutionary for Black women, to be able to love ourselves first and live in our truths. It's not what our experience has been for most of our lives, or for our grandmothers or our great-great-grandmothers. And so part of it to me, like Black Girl Magic, is also like living, like I get to live in this in a different way than so many people who came before us. And that's a really beautiful thing.
What I was thinking is like tapping into ancestral power and tapping into like all of the dreams that the women that came before us wanted but couldn't access, and then like fulfilling those dreams now, and like being what our ancestors prayed for, and like knowing that is undeniable, and that is actually what people like crave and long for, is that like richness that comes from our ancestry and our history.
I think one of the greatest challenges of Black women in America is that whereas other ethnicities have this strong sense of like culture and identity, we've been robbed of that because of the egregious past of slavery. And the Black diaspora is so broad and so spread out that there's so much of who we are that was lost. And so we're tasked with having to rebuild that identity. And many times it's through the Anglo-Saxon lens. So trying to come up with things that help us express ourselves that feel right for us, while also trying to deconstruct and desocialize from some of these parts of our identity that are toxic and that teach us how to hate ourselves. I know that that's the truth for all Black for all Black women, but then being a trans woman, on top of that, it's even more so, because I feel like many people think like, oh, this whole transgender conversation, like, what if they create now? And it's like, we've been around, we've been here. We also have ancestral ties, and colonialism or colonization destroyed that. And so on top of having to establish identity as a Black woman, we then have to establish expression and identity as trans Black women, which makes it even harder for us to hold space in society. What's so sad about the fact that there's so much tension sometimes among Black cisgender women and Black trans women. And for those who may not know, so cisgender is when your gender identity is in alignment with the sex that you were assigned at birth. So when you were born, if the doctor said, congratulations, it's a girl, and you identify as a woman, then you're considered cisgender. Trans, in many cases, is when your gender identity isn't in alignment with the sex you were assigned at birth. So basically, the doctor determined your identity based on your genitalia, which now modern science has actually taught us that that's not necessarily the case, because the gender or the sex of the brain can actually be different from your anatomical sex. It's really sad that Black women collectively have so much shared experience, whether you're cisgender or transgender, but I think we've been put in a position where we have to fight for space.
This is an experience that you've not had. If you feel like you've not met trans women before, I think probably for the most part that's probably not true. But I think that people probably feel like that. And so then what does that mean? So I've heard a lot of Black cis women say, I don't know what this cisgendered means. I did not say I was cis. Nobody told me that. They gave me a whole new name and didn't include me in the conversation, right? And so I think for some women, there's that experience of like, there's this newness, but a piece of it is you have to include those folks in the conversation, right? You can't give people terms and phrases without including them in it. I think a bigger piece though is the kind of education and the history that we have and the lack of information that comes out around sexuality, around gender, the incomprehensive sex education that happens in schools. And then like we as Black folks coming together and having kind of some really hard conversations that we've never had before, so that we can come into agreement around who we are and how we want to show up for each other.
The issue that you have with the idea of being a cis woman is because you just believe there's only one kind of woman, and it's the kind that is born with a vagina. And so what that does is like it becomes really uncomfortable and I've had a couple of friends who knew that they were like in a safe space and they knew that they could like talk to me, and they were just like, well, to be honest, a woman is a woman. So if you're saying you're a woman, shouldn't you just be a woman? And you will have some trans women, first of all, we're not a monolith. So there are some trans women who will tell you, I'm just a woman, period, full stop. I am not a trans woman, I'm just a woman. But for me, it's important for me to embrace my trans identity because there's also this understanding, especially in feminist movements, that when we talk about trans issues, we're taking away from women's issues collectively. And so I think by identifying as trans, I'm honoring the unique experiences that cis women have from the womb, having to deal with these very specific things around misogyny. Even I have a mother and a sister that I grew up with. And even today, when I'm engaging with cis women, I try to sometimes, and not all trans women would agree with this, I try to step back a little because I know that growing up, being socialized male, my opinion carried more weight. What I had to say deserved to hold more space. And so there have been moments where like I've been in spaces with cis women where I've had to check this deep-rooted misogyny that's so uncomfortable to talk about, because when we talk about misogyny, we say it as if it's only men who can promulgate misogyny, but that's not true. Women promulgate misogyny against one another.
We think about what a woman does, but what is, we know those roles real well, but what a woman means. I have to think about that and get back to you. Let me think about it.
But I think overall, when I think of kind of, for me, my role as a woman, there's a lot that's around taking care of folks in a different type of way. And I think as a Black woman, I struggle a bit with this martyr syndrome, right? Because I feel very much like, because I'm a woman, I can see things in a different kind of way. I, can understand the emotional side of things. I can understand the logistical things and the logics behind things. And I feel like I owe it so much to our community to pay it forward, to do what's right, to, make the next generation freer than we are. And
but that doesn't feel like a burden.
Oh, yes.
Because I feel like
you see these gray edges, girl? Yes, yes, a huge burden.
That's a burden that's placed on Black women so much that we have to be the ones, especially we see the conversation even happening in the current social and political climate with the debates in the presidential election. Everybody's like vying for the Black vote, which is predominantly Black women. And so there's this thing where we're expected to be attack dogs, or we're expected to kind of like show up and do all of the grit and grime of the work. But then when it comes to who benefits from that work, we're the last ones.
And is that what defines a woman?
And that's what makes it interesting when we talk about definitions of womanhood and the role and gender. Most of us are defining womanhood through a misogynistic lens, and we don't even realize it.
A hyper scrutiny of bodies, like as the center point of like who you are, like you are your body basically, but so much more of who you are is like your energy and what you carry with you on the inside. That's like has nothing to do with your body sometimes. But I also am intersex, so it's like the sheer existence of intersex people is what like cancels the whole scientific realm's like understanding of gender, because like there's more than just male or female. There's actually more than just male or female, and that's just like that's science. Like that's proven. That's like proven across the animal kingdom, across all life forms on Earth. But because of Western society, and like because of science, we've narrowed it down to a binary that is like just false. And so I think there's a lot of scrutiny about fitting into that binary one way or the other. And I think that womanhood is so much more than just a body. Like,
so you're saying, oh, you can't have kids, so you're not a real woman. So what are you telling the millions of women who can't have children? Like, what are we saying to them? Right. Are we saying that your value is only below your waist or your reproductive system? You're reinforcing by saying if you don't have a vagina or if you can't have children, what you're really saying is that you can't really be sexualized to the full extent, which by the way is not true, because a lot of these men out here
and women,
yes, who are saying all of these things don't really feel that. And so I think one of the most hurtful things for me is being on social media, seeing most of the trans misogynoir come from Black women, and I can't just like drop that word and not explain it. So trans misogynoir is our experiences at the intersection of racism, sexism, and transphobia. So like it's not enough to say, well, you don't understand, well, I'm a Black woman, and when they say that, they're saying I'm a real Black woman. But imagine having even your womanhood questioned and being denied that expression and identity on top of racism. Because Black women feel like home for me. More specifically, Black cisgender women, because I grew up in a matriarchal family. So where the women were the majority and it wasn't that many men in the family. And what Granny said was what Granny said. What my mama said was what my mama said. And so to know that Black women have such, as you mentioned earlier, the nurturers and the caretakers, they're essentially the rulers of the family. And so if we can't get Black women, Black cisgender women on board to love all Black lives and to see the validity in all forms and expressions of Blackness, it's really the touchstone.
Black women have a pivotal role in how violence plays out for trans women. But also I think from my experience, I've also had Black women be the people who stood up for me the most. Yes. So it's like both. Yes. It's like a duality there.
People around the fact that the gay Black experience isn't even the same experience that trans women even have. So, because in fact, we don't even with who we love and who we connect with, usually like men are like attracted to other men, and so gay men. And so we're in this weird kind of social purgatory where we're technically obviously not going to be embraced by gay men in that way. And then the men who do love us are too afraid to love us, because going back to what you were talking about, hyperfemininity and masculinization, because Black women have been treated like work mules and these like, social justice linebackers that have to do all of this work.
Come on, social justice linebacker.
A lot of times Black women, more specifically Black cisgender women, they need the men to up their expression of masculinity to overcompensate for the fact that they don't get to tap into femininity, which is often reserved for white women.
There is so much transphobia that happens amongst Black women. And as a Black cisgendered woman, I am privy to it more often than I like. And I understand that there's a privilege there that people feel comfortable talking. And these are like some of the wokest people that you hear and see around. But that there really is this gap when it comes to freedom for all folks. And that freedom looks different for Black cis women than trans women. And part of that shows up in HIV, that we have these high rates of HIV amongst Black trans women, so high, and oppression shows up. We don't even have actual numbers because the data is not recorded in a way where we can see effectively kind of really what the number is, but we know it's a huge impact, up to half.
Speaking of which, too, like they conflate it. So basically, for those who don't know, the CDC still considers trans women as MSM, men who have sex with men. So when we have the government and the CDC unwilling to see us, then
there's all these intersections where we should, as Black women, irregardless if we're cis or trans, show up and be there for each other. The ways that we experience intimate partner violence, the ways that we have to work harder when it comes to education or employment opportunities, that we can be, that we should be each other's best advocates. This conversation around womanhood is so important. What makes you a woman, right? Is it being able to have kids biologically? Is it being able to please a man? Like, what is it that defines women? And how do we ensure that we are supporting each other and holding space for each other?
One of the main reasons why I think the work that you all do at the Black AIDS Institute is so important is because we also have to look at the lack of services for HIV competency is intentional. So even when we look at historical accounts like that of the Tuskegee experiment and how they were intentionally inflicting STDs on Black people as case studies, using them as like lab rats. And so historically, in the United States and in the healthcare industry, even pap smears and all that, these were things that were done to Black people specifically, as if we were like, lab rats. And so fast forward in 2019, it is still, in my honest opinion, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I don't get into all of those vibes, but stats show that, again, Black people are disproportionately impacted by the lack of access to healthcare. So I think that the best thing we can do for ourselves is support organizations like the Black AIDS Institute and others like it to make sure that we're opening up this dialogue around what HIV is. Also helping to strip the stigma away from it. So this idea that you're dirty or you're like filthy or you're gonna die or, and it's like, girl, everybody's gonna die. Like there's not, like we can't escape it. But I think that it's important not only that we have those kind of organizations, but it's important that we get our own people into the industry. I have a sister who's so amazing. Her name is Vanessa Wari, and she's a Black trans woman, and she's a Point Foundation scholar, and she's actually going to school for research. So she's doing qualitative and quantitative analysis to help us conduct our own research, because it's interesting when you were talking about the binary earlier and how it's so dumbed down. That's because white supremacy is dumb as all get out. And so it's that big bully on the playground who sees you making good grades and doing all this, and it doesn't feel it has anything to contribute. So it uses brute force to erase your greatness. And so we see that come through in gender. We see that come through in academia. Academia is a weapon that is often used against us. And so it's a bigger question around who are we allowing to conduct these research, these like projects, and what are they saying about us, and is what they're saying about us true or not?
If you look at the history of gender, or like the understanding of gender in like a non-white space, like if you go back generations, like women, and particularly trans women, what we understand as trans women, were at the center of society. Like we were like the oracles, we were the people, we were the spiritual leaders, we were like integral to society. And so to destabilize a community or a society, you take away what is most important and you turn it into something that is evil, seen as evil. And so if you look at like a lot of imagery of the devil, a lot of devil imagery is actually trans women where she has like breasts and a penis. And so it's like the demonization of trans bodies was done intentionally because of the value that we did have to our societies, and taking that away from our society was a strategic choice.
And so if we want to do this for us and by us, then we have to, I think, make a significant investment in how we make sure that we do education and lift up other folks so they understand this. I don't think that this can be on the backs of trans women to lead. And I think there's a huge role that we as Black cisgendered women have to lead the effort in having these conversations with folks. Because for one, some of these conversations happen, you know, in the DMs, they happen secretly, they aren't gonna have it openly. I think especially where we're at now, there is a concern, especially for folks who think that they're a little woke, they think that they're doing the right thing, they think they care about freedom for Black people, that they know there's certain topics if they go down, then they're gonna be kind of scarlet lettered.
Well, first of all, there's this false notion that comes from cis hetero Black folks that the reason why trans issues are not Black issues is because we can just scurry off into the LGBTQ community and be safe. There's a lot of people that see trans liberation as a distraction and a detraction from Black liberation work. And so the thing that I then offer up to them is that some of the greatest instances of transphobia and racism and misogyny that I've ever experienced have actually come from the LGBTQ community. I have had so many conversations with gay white men about using their sexuality as a shield to hide their racism, sexism, and transphobia and absolve them from the responsibility to help dismantle some of those systems that they actively benefit from. And so, again, it's one of those things where having to recognize that, yes, we're trans, but we're Black before anything. Before anything, because when we go into these other spaces, carrying that trans identity, it doesn't carry any real weight or any real support, and there's no real sense of community. And so when we start recognizing that we're Black before anything else, we can't keep going into these spaces and educating. It's like a vacuum, like we're preaching to the choir. And so if we're ever going to be liberated, we have to get out of our silos. So the responsibility, yes, Black cis women have a responsibility to help initiate some of these conversations. Yes, Black folks in general. However, we need to be prepared to muster up the courage.
I was just walking down the street, minding my business, you know, and it was like a very masculine presenting Black woman. I'm assuming she goes by she, I don't know, but she was like lesbian, very masc presenting. And it was a group of Black people and she just kept being like, oh, that's a nigga, that's a nigga, that's a nigga. Like really hard. And like, it was the thing where I had to go to the store and then I had to walk back by and she did it again. And so I stopped and I was like, honestly, you look more like a nigga than I do. Like, I don't know why you're coming for me. This is a flex on you, but you're flexing on me because people dog on you. So it's like, why? Period. Who? I'm like, you. And when I said that, everyone said, ooh. And then, like, that's the tea. I'm like, but it's like, it's really about having, like, being a scapegoat to so many people. It's like, but why, like, really? Like, I don't know. It's just crazy because, like you said, it's like even other gay people or, like, queer people, like, it's really hard out here, but it's just like, wouldn't you want to like not do that?
Any kind of ounce of like privilege you can get and you can shit on somebody, that is what many people unfortunately fall into. And I think that we probably all fallen into it in some types of ways. And I think that healthcare has been one of the ways, the very strategic ways, the intentional ways that access and power has been cut off from us. And you know, it goes from kind of when we go and talk to clinicians and whether we feel comfortable talking to them about our bodies. When you look at some of the statistics around the number, I think less than half of Black women have ever been offered an HIV test in their lifetime, which is crazy, especially how often, you know, Black women go into healthcare. And then I think there's also, you know, you talked about this earlier, and I think this is so important around kind of how trans healthcare shows up and how trans healthcare is not just for trans folks, it's for all of us. Like I think about, going to the doctor when I've been pregnant these 2 times, and like there was never a conversation about gender and gender identity with me, I think about all of the like little, what are those?
Not only that, but even when we're talking about reproductive justice, that includes trans men and non-binary folks. Like trans men can carry pregnancies, and people don't think about that.
Yeah, and so, how do we advocate for that? How do we make sure that we have clinicians who look like us, clinicians that we trust, and clinicians that can speak to the fullness and the wholeness of our lives? So there's clinicians, but there's also the people at the front desk. I mean, as an organization, we go across the country all the time talking to folks, and I hear so regularly, particularly from Black trans women, the experience they have when they go to the front desk and them being misgendered, the just like sheer disrespect they get from receptionists or nurses. Thank you guys so much for coming here. It was a little bit longer than a manicure and a pedicure session. So I appreciate you guys for taking the time to do that with us today. And for me, and I think for us at Black AIDS Institute, it really kind of reaffirms this commitment we have to really ending HIV, but doing it in a way that holistically responds to who we are as Black folks. We are launching our We the People, a Black Plan to End HIV campaign. It's coming out, the report is coming out February 7th. We've been doing informant interviews, we've done focus groups, we've done town halls across the country, and really pulling together recommendations from Black folks, the diversity of us, the beauty of us all, to figure out what it takes to end HIV in Black communities. And to me, ending HIV in Black communities looks more like this. It looks more like having conversations like this. It looks more like us coming together as family and having conversations that feel hard, that stretch us and make us grow, but make us really think about what it means for all of us to be free, right? That we all get to have the same rights, that we all get to choose freedom, we all get to choose happiness in a way that, because of who you love, how you're born, where you live, that those things don't impact HIV, right? They don't impact how you get to live and how you get to love. And so I'm excited for, at least personally, to have this conversation as part of kind of this kickoff to our campaign. And I'm really grateful for you guys to be a part of it.